like what's happened last month where Red Hat and IBM decided to make closed sourced. So
He's not very happy.
what I wanted to ask is like,
This year has been a very interesting year if your name is Red Hat. And recently there was a talk at Flock 2023 by Brian Exelbeard, the technical business strategist for Red Hat, which is technical speak for the person who decides the technical focuses of the company. In his case, he's specifically focused on upstream communities, developers, and the unpaid Linux market. This talk is titled, "What Does Red Hat Want?" And basically, nobody has seen it. This is a really interesting talk, and I highly recommend you go and watch the entire thing. It is 36 minutes long. We are not going to watch it all, but I will leave it linked in the description down below. Instead, I want to talk about some really interesting excerpts. Now, if you know anything about Flock, you might know there are previous talks with the exact same name. This is kind of a recurring theme. It's done to sort of explain the direction that Red Hat is taking, why they're involved in Fedora, why they're involved in CentOS, what they're trying to get out of these projects, and things like that. But this year, it has a very different meaning. Let's start at 7:17.
Something else that I've been noticing is that there's a lot of confusion about companies and communities, especially when the community project is sponsored by a company.
Things like Fedora, like GNOME has some funding, and a ton of other like Red Hat gives a lot of money out to the community.
And this is something else that comes up a lot when Red Hat's talked about, because we sponsor a lot of projects. And I'm seeing that some of our new enterprise Linux friends, they're having this same challenge too. So we need to think about the difference in those. You see, done right, and I do think Red Hat does this right, the community is held at arm's length. The community has the independence to be able to have a separate opinion on the same things that the company has.
I think a good recent example of this is the LibreOffice RPM. That got dropped from maintainership by Red Hat. Like, Red Hat was the ones developing that. And whilst Fedora has dropped it as well, like, this is not something that is generally agreed upon by the community. There is a lot of people that preferred the RPM over the Flatpak, but this isn't something that's being enforced by Red Hat. If someone wants to go and maintain an RPM themselves, they are totally free to do that. And this idea of agency is going to be very important.
And Red Hat strongly believes in agency. When Red Hatters go to work in open source projects, they have agency.
Pretty much every notable project under the sun probably has at least one or two Red Hat developers involved. Maybe they're not being paid directly to work on that project, but Red Hat has a lot of employees, and these employees do a lot of incredible work. So whilst people might have criticisms of Red Hat as a company, please don't direct those criticisms to the individual engineers. The engineers, they don't control what corporate is doing.
They're expected to act in the best interests of the project. They have things they want to do, for sure, but they have that agency to go and do it in the way that is best for that community, not just best for Red Hat. And that agency, it shows up in the community projects that we sponsor. Both the Fedora project and the CentOS project have governing bodies that are set up to govern through consensus. Red Hat doesn't have a magic veto here. Both projects have someone who's in a dual role. That person represents Red Hat to the project and represents the project inside of Red Hat. Now in the Fedora project,
And I think in most cases, this plays out perfectly well. Like, you're not complaining about every single little change being made in Fedora. Yeah, Fedora is run by a distinguished Red Hat engineer, but it's not like Matthew is trying to tear that project down because Red Hat told him to do so. That's just not the case. Most of the decisions, everybody just agrees with. If they didn't, it wouldn't be a very successful project, and Matthew wouldn't be in that position. But here we have something about CentOS.
for those of you who know me personally,
CentOS,
you know that I like to talk often about taxation. But if you go to a CentOS project board meeting, you will find that I say very, very little. And that is because there I speak as Red Hat, and Red Hat doesn't have a lot of opinions, and we haven't needed to deny consensus. The Fedora project and the CentOS project have agency. There is not an interlocking governance structure that is shared with its corporate sponsors. And while the projects may at times have a significant number of Red Hatters in them, and in their governance in particular, it isn't because this is a requirement. It's because those Red Hatters are passionate about the community, and the community has recognized this. And they've selected those Red Hatters through whatever the process that each project uses to select members of its leadership. They're not being selected because they represent or are acting on behalf of Red Hat.
And I have no doubts that is the case, and Red Hat isn't directing every single little movement being made by these projects. But that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some involvement there. I think most notably with the CentOS case, where you don't get that situation happening without Red Hat being directly involved. Shutting down the CentOS project, the downstream clone of RHEL, which is what it had been its entire life, to be replaced with CentOS Stream, the upstream development branch of RHEL. RHEL doesn't become the downstream of another project without direct involvement from Red Hat. This is something that could only have come from Red Hat and could only have happened because of Red Hat's influence over the project. I don't think he's lying here. I just think he's talking in a very particular and thought out way. In the vast majority of cases, I am sure that Red Hat doesn't have an opinion. They don't care about the day-to-day operations of the projects. But there are cases where they do have an opinion, and this is one of those cases where CentOS isn't acting as a community project, it is acting as a Red Hat project. Whether you think the original CentOS model should have ever existed, or whether you prefer CentOS Stream, is completely irrelevant here. This is what happened, and when it happened, it caused this massive wave of confusion, because it was not handled well, and a lot of people were just like, I don't know what we're going to do now. Luckily, Rocky and Alma Linux came in to basically fill that gap, but if they weren't there, I don't know what would have happened. Now, much of the middle of the talk, I don't really care about. It's about why CentOS Stream only has Red Hat maintainers, why anybody can go and submit changes, but often they get rejected. So we're going to skip ahead to 1638.
So remember, Red Hat's cautious. We take CentOS Stream, we pass it through a productization process, and we wrap it with a bunch of promises and agreements and services for delivery to our customers. So we only recommend RHEL be used in production. Mm-hmm. If you have a RHEL-shaped problem, we're going to tell you to use RHEL. Now,
a part that he skips over here is we're going to tell you to use RHEL because RHEL is the thing we make money on.
Converse of that is this. If you come to Red Hat and you go, hey, Red Hat, is this recommended for use in production? We're going to say, okay, well, how does it relate to the promises and agreements that we make with our customers? And if it doesn't match, we're not going to recommend it. And so this is why you can find a statement on a Red Hat website right now, today, that says CentOS Stream is not designed for production use.
That would be this one right here. We search for production. CentOS Stream is a continuously delivered distribution that lets open source community members contribute to Red Hat Enterprise Linux in tandem with Red Hat developers. CentOS Stream may seem like a natural choice to replace CentOS Linux, but it is not designed for production use. It is intended as a development platform for Red Hat partners and others that want to participate and collaborate in the Red Hat Enterprise Linux ecosystem. Consequently, running CentOS Stream in production environments presents many challenges compared to enterprise-ready distributions like Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
And the reason for that is that it doesn't fulfill the specific promises and the specific agreements that we make with our customers. Now, there are a lot of Linux distributions out there, and there are a few that claim to solve the same problems that RHEL does. Mm-hmm. We think RHEL is the best of all of them, and we don't recommend any of the others for use in production. But this doesn't make them bad operating systems. It just means we're not recommending them, and we're not going to make a promise about them.
Besides the money aspect, what he is saying here is we have tested RHEL. We have our support structure with RHEL. We know exactly what RHEL is going to be. This is set up to be for a production work environment. So this is what we recommend. CentOS Stream is the development platform to get things ready to be in RHEL. That, yeah, you can use it in production, but it's not at the RHEL level yet, and if it was, it already would be in RHEL. And as for other distributions out there, well, they're not Red Hat products. We've not done any of the testing on them, so we can't recommend their use. Also money.
But I want to be super clear here, because there seems to be a lot of confusion. If you've got a problem that CentOS Stream or Fedora Linux solves, use it. They're both great operating systems. They're operating systems you can trust. I know people who use CentOS Stream personally. They're very, very happy with it. I happen to run Fedora Linux, specifically Fedora Workstation and Fedora IoT on my own devices. It fits the bill for me. I don't need what CentOS Stream or RHEL is offering. I've chosen what meets my needs.
That, I think we can all agree with. Use the thing that makes the most sense for you. But let's go ahead to something a little bit more exciting, say. What does Red Hat not want?
Now, I've talked some about what Red Hat wants. Inevitably, someone will ask in the Q&A, is there anything Red Hat doesn't want? Well, yes, there is. Red Hat does not actually want to monetize the entire market of Linux consumers. We're not interested in that. We know that there are people who do not ever want to pay Red Hat or may not ever want to pay for Linux. And that's great. Good for you. Have a nice day.
Whilst it would certainly be nice if everyone could afford to donate to every single project they like, some people simply just don't have the resources to do so, or maybe just choose not to. One of the great things about the FOSS world we have is not just the free as in free software, but free as in monetarily free. If you have the source code, you don't have to pay for this software. I know there is a lot of concern outside of Red Hat about things like open core software, and then when it comes to Red Hat, some people are worried, they're going to become like Microsoft and try to monetize everything and steal all of your data. But it's really good to see that even though sane people didn't think that was ever going to be the case, it's good to see that someone from Red Hat is explicitly saying that this is not the goal. Their focus is on monetizing things outside of this space. But also, inside of the enterprise space, there are things they don't want to monetize.
And I want to be clear that within the market of folks that we do not want to monetize, there's a significant number of people who just don't want the things that RHEL promises and delivers. If you don't need RHEL, we're not going to sell you RHEL. And while I'm talking about this monetization concept, even within the part of the market that we want to monetize, there are significant segments that we don't want to. And you can see that in the RHEL developer programs for individual and teams. We're not interested in monetizing what we call the development use case.
Yeah, trying to monetize the development use case is when you start driving developers away. See, for example, the Reddit situation, the Twitter situation, when you start charging exorbitant prices for developers to use your APIs or use your tooling, the developers just leave. And you knew it was coming. Let's talk about the clones.
While I'm mentioning competitors, we're not worried about competitors. Competitors make a market stronger by bringing differentiated value. And the key here is differentiated value. The operating system is not a commodity, and you can prove this by the number of operating systems that are available for you to use in the market.
I would argue the operating system is not a commodity, but the distro is. If we're talking about Windows, macOS, and Linux, certainly, but a lot of Linux distros are very much interchangeable with each other, and in the enterprise space, that is especially true because a lot of them are just RHEL with a different coat of paint on them.
And so in our view, if someone tries to copy RHEL without adding any improvement, but just making it cheaper, it harms everyone. This activity creates confusion for consumers who often come away with a false sense of security because they think a promise has been made about the copy that hasn't been made.
Well, the only promise that's really being made about the copy is it's one-to-one compatible with RHEL. That's what Alma Linux is, that's what Oracle Linux is, that's what Rocky Linux is. No other promises are really being made there. And at least prior to all the source code stuff, I don't see how that promise wasn't being made. If you pull the exact same source code, you're gonna be one-to-one compatible.
And when you consider the act of copying, it creates a race to the bottom. It generally starts with a lowering of prices, which is because the copier has an almost zero lower bound for pricing. And all of the costs, they're being borne by the thing that's being copied. So this reduces the...
I think that's certainly true in the case of the cost of the operating system itself. Totally fair. But that's not the only thing that's being charged for in the enterprise space. The majority of the money being made is regarding support. The level of support that's being offered, the kind of support that's being offered, the speed of that support, and whilst there'd be a race to lower the prices, that would also be the case if the distros weren't copying each other either. Prior to all the OpenELA stuff, take SUSE for example. RHEL is not based on SUSE, and SUSE is not based on RHEL. But they both operate in the enterprise Linux space, and they both have vastly different offerings. But for most use cases, they are both going to be perfectly suitable. The companies are going to have to compete with each other, and in many cases that will lead to one of the companies lowering their prices, differentiating their support, and in this case, it has nothing to do with the distros being clones of each other.
So this reduces the funding that's available to improve and grow the original. And the response in other industries is to start to cut it. You try to focus it more narrow and more narrow. In software, what you'd see is the code base would become more specialized, and it would meet fewer people's needs. Now, as an open source community...
What I don't understand is why has this become an issue now? CentOS, before its takeover by Red Hat, started in 2004. Oracle Linux, which is also a clone of Red Hat, started in 2006. But it's not until 2023 where there's this concern that the market is unsustainable. How has it been sustainable with Red Hat massively growing over the years for nearly 20 years? That part has never been explained to me, and I think it's because it's unexplainable. The value that Red Hat offers isn't just in RHEL, it is in the support offerings made by Red Hat, and those support offerings are only going to be made to people who are a Red Hat customer. So it doesn't matter if a company was going to be using CentOS, because that company was never going to be a big part of your profit margin anyway. If you make them pay for a license, they'll pay for a license, but they were never going to pay for Red Hat support, they just didn't need it. It's kind of like the argument of downloads of a torrent being sales of a game lost. Those are not direct conversions. You can't just say, all of these people using CentOS, if we don't make CentOS available, they're all going to become RHEL customers and pay for RHEL. Well, no, that's just not how that works. A lot of those people were never going to pay for RHEL in the first place. Like many of those people pirating a game, were never going to pay for the game in the first place.
Now, as an open source community, we like to think that open source is immune to this. We have the ability to contribute upstream, so none of this is going to happen for us. But if you start to examine this, what you'll find is those upstream contributions, they're not the thing being copied.
Well, they actually are explicitly being copied. That's sort of the whole point of them being upstream. But I get what he's saying. It's not like there are projects that are cloning a project and then just pulling the commits. And actually, no, there are projects doing that. It's called a fork. I'm not sure I don't know what he's trying to say here, actually.
What's being copied is the distribution. And the distribution is an opinionated collection of all of those upstream components. And that opinionation is the differentiation, and that's what's being copied. That opinionation, that differentiation, it's developed by product managers, by market needs. And if you destroy that market, you destroy that ability for that differentiation to exist and for a strong, healthy market of differentiated offerings to exist.
I go back to what I said before. If it's been sustainable for close to 20 years, I don't know how it's not sustainable now. And I'm very curious to see how this all plays out with the new OpenELA existing and SUSE spending a lot of money trying to make this singular source of truth for what enterprise Linux is, and then other projects can build off of that. We might see a world where regardless what Red Hat feels about it, we're going to have all of these enterprise systems that are basically the same thing and then differentiating based on their support offerings. You know, the model that we've had this entire time. Before we end it, fun part of the end here from the one question Q&A.
The speech was really good, but one thing I'm thinking of, as like a commercial open source project, there has been stumbles. When does like the business kind of take over? Like what's happened last month where Red Hat and IBM decided to make closed sourced. So
He's not very happy.
what I wanted to ask is like,
I love it so much. I love that the only question asked includes IBM and closed source. Absolutely perfect. See, this is what we mean by holding the community at arm's length. The community can have a very different opinion. In this case, this guy very much doesn't like what Red Hat's doing. But what do you think? As I said at the start, be sure to go watch the entire video yourself. It's a great talk. I know that I'm focusing on like the negative parts, but most of it is just, general operational stuff. And if you're interested in the Fedora world, the CentOS world, the Red Hat world, this is a great talk to listen to. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribe, Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and the Red Hat fun will never end.
Like this.